I have so much literature, so much material on this, John, and it's such a big topic, and we're just going to scratch the surface today. Honestly, there's no way we can even get into it. Coming out of the Message, and even my last years in the Message, one of the things that drove me, once I started to discover that these revelations we had been told William Branham brought to us directly from God, once I started to discover, hey, this isn't the case, I became almost obsessed to figure out where did the stuff that we believe come from. And in the Message, what you believe is what the difference between heaven and hell. So I think that cult mentality did a little bit of driving me into figure this stuff out. But this library behind me, John, is the product of trying to figure out where the stuff that we believed came. And a very large part of what we believe in the Message came out of the Latter Rain movement. And we're definitely going to get in and start touching on some of that today. And, the Latter Rain movement and the Healing Revival are two different movements, but they're parallel and intertwined a lot. The two movements together could be referred to as the second wave of Pentecostalism. This is what starts off the second wave of Pentecostalism, which most historians will tell you William Branham was the leading figure in the second wave of Pentecostalism. And this ended up producing the Charismatic movement that you see, Charismatic movement came in as strong, especially in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then from that kind of then birthed a lot of what you'd call today the New Apostolic Reformation. And there's connections all the way back here to what happens in really the late 40s that kicks all of this stuff off. And I'm excited to talk about that. John, do you want to talk a little bit about how William Branham came to Canada and how the Latter Rain was inspired by the stuff that he was doing?
Yes, and it's interesting because, so you took the approach of the books, and I'm fascinated by looking at the library that the viewers that are watching this on YouTube can see behind you. It's just incredible because you have literally recreated what William Branham had in his own library, and the access to the different doctrines, teachers, some of them good, some of them would be very questionable, that he has based these quote-unquote revelations on. Well, I took a much different approach, and we both, interestingly, came to about the same conclusion, but I've always been like this. Whenever I was a child, my parents, they'd get upset with me for Christmas presents. If they bought me a radio, well, the first thing that I did was take it apart and see what's inside of it, what made this thing work. And when I discovered that William Branham not only was participating in Latter Rain, but he was basically one of two main catalysts, and he created a splinter group within Latter Rain that birthed Jim Jones and People's Temple and some very, very horrific things. I wanted to take it apart. I wanted to know what made it tick. So I started from the opposite end, not from where William Branham started. I began researching all of these different trails that led back to Latter Rain, and oh my gosh, I could not believe that this thing that I was in created this whole mess. And you're right, it all started in Canada, because after, we've been covering the episodes leading up to William Branham's birth of fame, which is very important to understand. Well, many of those men had connections in Canada, and the Pentecostal movement as a whole was spread throughout the United States and Canada at that time. And there are two key figures in that would be bringing, the message throughout the United States and Canada, as it was at this time. The Latter Rain message is what it was called. And those were A.W. Rasmussen and Joseph Matson Bose, who are two figures that I had heard their names over and over and over on the recordings of William Branham. I just had no idea who these guys were.
Yeah, and they're big name guys. Like if you watch the Deep Call to Deep video, these are the men sitting literally right behind William Branham on the platform. They're at his meetings constantly.
Yes, and we'll get into it in the later episodes, but it's literally because of these two men that the message exists today, the charismatic movement. They literally kept his ministry intact after it began to implode. And it all started basically with one semi-famous revival tour through Canada. William Branham was asked to come speak at a few different small churches and conventions, and by this time everyone had heard of his 1947 fame that he had from the St. Louis travels that we've been talking about from 1945 to 1947-ish. They were, his name was getting well recognized, and this spread into Canada.
Right, and as you come into the middle in 1947, he comes in contact with Gordon Lindsay, and
Right.
Gordon Lindsay is who then organizes these meetings actually across Canada for him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's quite a big deal, and I know that historians have basically placed the origins of latter rain in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, but from what I can tell from my research, that is just where latter rain became famous. William Branham was already establishing what would become the latter rain movement. It's just that these men helped carry it and basically helped make it, popular and mainstream.
You're right there. I think it is. Historians will say that George Hawtin met William Branham or encountered William Branham for the first time in Vancouver, and then he went back and the latter rain revival fell out. But it's quite likely, honestly, that George Hawtin had heard about William Branham possibly as early as 1945. George Hawtin was connected with the Elam churches, and there's quite a few articles where he's connected with the Elam churches. And Kidson, W.D. Kidson, who we've mentioned before, who was very key in kicking off William Branham's first revival meetings in 1945 and 46, in the period of rising to his fame. Obviously not the first time he preached ever, but he was also deeply connected to the Elam churches, right? And it is quite likely, I think, that George Hawtin could have heard about William Branham through Kidson and the Elam churches, well before 1947. But certainly by 1947, he had went to William Branham meetings in Canada, and he really became enamored. He became mesmerized and amazed by what he saw happening in these Branham meetings in Canada. And he wants to go home and have the same kind of experiences in his church at the orphanage. And that Sharon Orphanage is, it's an orphanage, but it's also a Bible college. And there's a lot of young people there that had grown up in the orphanage, and also ones that were there from around the region who'd went there for Bible study reasons. So there's a group of students there that he's overseeing, and this is where things kick off. The initial latter rain revival kind of begins. One thing I think that's worth mentioning here is that George Hawtin went to these revival meetings and was mesmerized apparently by the things that he saw and the miracles taking place. But we have other eyewitness accounts from these exact same meetings. Men like Alfred Pohl, who's actually in leadership with William Branham on the platform through these things, and confirms that a lot of these things that appeared to be supernatural, especially the healings, were hoaxes. Vast numbers of people that William Branham pronounced healed, like no doubt the very same people that George Hawtin saw William Branham pronounce healed and was mesmerized by and went back home, vast numbers of those people actually died just shortly after William Branham left town. And so on that side of things, George Hawtin was, in one sense you could say, taken, because what he saw was not entirely accurate, and the beliefs that he took out of it wasn't entirely accurate.
I think it's important to establish there are two categories of people that we're going to be discussing. There were the people who were coming as part of the revival as participants. They were the ones who they Some people were healed in these things. We've established that before. There were a lot of people that were not, and there were a lot of people that were interested to see what was going to happen. And that's category one.